G'day, I'm Dave Morrell. I've been a vet in Broome in the West Kimberleys for the last 45 years and I've just written this book about the Kimberleys and things I've done in the Kimberleys and the development of the Kimberleys and about Aboriginal people. And Steph's asked me to do a poem from the book, so I'm about to do that. This poem's called Riley's Yard. And over the years I have seen yards built in inappropriate places, and I've also seen cattle rushes where the cattle have, in a cyclone, they've gone into the ocean and been chewed up by sharks and things. You know, sometimes hundreds and even thousands of head. Riley's Yard. Now Riley was a man with a stubborn streak. When he built his yard near the Meter Creek, it was 100 yards from side to side near the clay pan flat where the creek runs wide. A gravel road would run to the ramp. It was Riley's thought to beat the damp. He wanted a yard where the trucks could get, even in the middle of the biggest wet. Keith Bolger was a man of considerable age, and he'd retired at Meter on a meagre wage. He'd seen the seasons come and go, the wildest cyclones' violent show. He heard of the yard on the clay pan flat, and he said to Riley, "I wouldn't do that. I remember the flood of '52, when the water there was deeper than you." But Riley was a man with a stubborn streak, and he looked at Keith and started to speak. "This'll be a yard like you've never seen, one of the biggest that's ever been. We'll bury the posts in 3'6" and fill each hole with a concrete mix. We'll weld the rails with a welding team and double the welds at every seam. We'll cut the posts from railway line. The rails all made from 4-inch railway line. The rails all made from galvanised iron. A shaded roof to cover the pound. A Warwick crush will bolt to the ground. If we get a wet with a clay pan floods, this yard's so strong that it won't budge. With wets much bigger than in the past, I'll eat my hat if this yard don't last." Bolger turned and walked away, his scepticism on display. He wasn't a man to argue the toss, especially with his stubborn boss. He pegged the yard at the clay pan site. Trucks bought steel day and night. The posts all dug to 3'6", and the posts made firm with a concrete mix. The rails were measured and cut to length and welded double for extra strength. The gates were hung and the gates were swung. Riley's heart swelled up with a lofty pride, and with choked emotion he nearly cried. 'Twas a February night at 9:30. Kelvin's voice on the telephone line. "Indonesia's sure to meet. They're offering a price that's hard to beat. We need 2,000 Brahman greys to load a ship in 7 days. Meter Station's the only one with an all-weather road where the trucks can come." Now Riley was a man with a greedy streak. When he built his yard near the Meter Creek, as he did his maths, his eyes got bigger and his heartbeat raced at the final figure. 2,000 head through the drafting gate, 400 kilos average weight, 350 a kilo on the place, each one weighed through the drafting race. He'd pay for his yard in one fell toss, with money left over for his running costs. His owners would drink a toast to him, his ringers would brag and boast of him. So they mustered north and they mustered west, and the cattle they mustered were all of his best. The cattle were flushed from the scrub and rock, men on horsebacks walked the stock. 2 days drafting through the drafting pound, so the cattle selected were fat and sound. The tails culled for sale at another time, so the cattle selected were an even line. That night, when the men were having tea, someone said, "There's a cyclone brewing out to sea. It's got the power of an atom bomb and it'll cross the coast before too long." Now Riley was a man with an arrogant streak. When he built his yard near the Meter Creek, he looked down his nose and he sprouted forth, "A blow's never crossed this far north. You can rest all night in an easy way and we'll load the trucks in the light of day." The men were exhausted from the work and heat, and when they hit the sack they were all dead beat. An eerie silence when they went to sleep. Not a breath of wind, not a moving leaf. The sky was clear on a starlit night, and they slept as deep as a dead man might. As soon as the station lights are out, the cyclone turned itself about. She picked up speed to 30 k's, poised for havoc in the next few days. At 2 a.m. the wind gained speed and the first drops fell like pumpkin seeds, and the rain fell down like a waterfall, and the wind began to howl and squall, and the lightning flashed and the thunder crashed, and the wind was roaring with a terrible sound, and the rain smashed into the sodden ground. Riley woke from his sleep at last to a thunderclap like a cannon blast. He leapt from his bed in mortal fear and roared off in the truck in lowest gear. But only 2K of ground did he gain when the truck bogged down in the black soil plain. He cursed the truck and he cursed his luck, he cursed the rain, and he cursed his God again and again. The water was roaring down Meter Creek, bucking and splashing, the outlook bleak. The level rose at an astonishing rate, and soon it was lapping at the new yard's gate. The cattle bawled and shook with fright, circled the yard in their desperate plight. A lightning flash showed the whites of their eyes, each thunderclap a new surprise. All as one they charged the rails. The hit measured 5 on the Richter scales. 30 head of steers were crushed when the panic mob first rushed, but the post stood strong and the wells held on. They both survived that first onslaught. But it was only some time the yard had bought. Their weight combined was 1,000 tonne, and they hit the yard at near full run. As the metal tore, the night air screeched, and the side of the yard was breached. The post bent down and lay on the ground. Legs were broken where the steel tangled. Bodies were trampled, maimed and mangled. And the lightning flashed, and the thunder crashed, and the wind was roaring with a terrible sound, and the rain smashed into the sodden ground. Blind and lost, they galloped as one and headed for the creek in a suicide run. The whole mad mob crashed over the bank, and to the bottom of the raging creek they sank. Then rose to the surface, gasping for breath, fear in their eyes as they headed for death. The creek was a torrent that carried them high, then it gushed under pressure to a river nearby. The river ferocious in its power and its might. Then it spilled out to sea near the Bight. The cattle were helpless against the power of the flow, and they bobbed like corks in a mile-long row. The sharks fed in frenzy for a week at least. It was a horror to behold when they attacked the beast, and the crocs dined out for a month or more on the bodies of the beasts that were washed ashore. They say 1,200 head perished that night, but the true exact figure could never be right. Bodies were found in the forks of trees, and the smell of rotting was strong in the breeze. Riley packed his bag in a vacant state, and he bowed his head as he shut the gate. His spirit was broken and his mind was mute as he drove from the station in his tray-top ute. Something had snapped inside his brain, and he never went to the north again.